Thank you so much for joining us. This is actually our very first event for this new Artist Think Tank series. My name is Simon Tam. I'm one of the founders of the Slants Foundation. And what we are is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to providing mentorship and resources to artists, activists of Asian American descent. And so it is inherently part of our mission to get people funding, to get them attention, to provide opportunities, and also to connect with advocacy organizations across this country, because we believe in using our art as a medium to create social change. And so this is something that we're all very passionate about. I'm joined here by several of our board members. Tish, if you want to say hello real quick.
Hey, my name's Bao, and I'm a musician and also one of the board members on the foundation. And I'm looking forward to sharing things with you guys today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sue-Ann Shah. I'm joining you from Taipei, Taiwan right now. I'm a musician. I put out a documentary film a few years ago, and I'm currently here in Taiwan doing grad school in musicology, but I also do some like Christian theology work and other sorts of activism and organizing. So.
Hey, I'm Joe, musician, filmmaker, board member of the Slants Foundation. Am I still the vice chair? I think I am still the vice chair.
Eric's still kind of taking a leave.
Yeah, so I'm the vice chair of the Slants Foundation. Welcome, everyone.
So I would love to kind of get to know each of you. If we could do kind of a chat box check-in, and then we'll dive into the material. So in the chat box, if you can just please kind of share your name or your artist name, any particular favorite social media handle you might have, and the best link for somebody to purchase your music, and if you don't have your music for sale, to stream it or to offer you some kind of support in any kind of way. So if you could just go ahead and type that into the chat box, that would be great for everyone to kind of get to know who's in the room. We'll have some more opportunities as well to have kind of individual sharing of that too. But if you want to just type that in, that would be fantastic. In the meantime, I'm going to share a couple of survey results that you might find interesting. So when when you registered for this event, I kind of sent out a survey that just to kind of get a feel for where people were with their kind of respective music careers, where it was in terms of interest, in terms of topics you want to discuss, things you want to learn. And this is some of the stuff that kind of I thought was really interesting. So these were some of the responses that came in terms of topics. It seemed like overwhelming majority of folks wanted to learn about pitching your music, which is what we're going to dive into specifically tonight. But there was also a lot of interest in around art and activism, which is great because that's right in line with our mission. This one kind of got cut off, but it's booking and touring. So both in person as well as virtual events, social media marketing, a lot of kind of predictable things that I see that are common across the board for artists who are looking for support. But I kind of also wanted to give you a vision of where people were. So in terms of like making money as a musician, events seem pretty important. The more, if you look here, more people than fewer are kind of depending on events as a form of income. Of course, COVID has disrupted that. And that is something that I want you to know that we're also very aware of, and that we're watching very carefully as part of the Slants Foundation, where we're trying to help provide additional resources, grants, and that sort of thing to artists, especially since those revenue streams have been disrupted. And if you follow us on social media using @the Slants Found, whenever I come across new grants and opportunities, we love to share those out as well so that you can continue getting support for your work. If you kind of go down here to how important is physical merchandise to your income, this could almost not be a better example of a bell curve, right? In terms of like, yes, it's kind of like right now it seems about average with a few folks on either end of like being yay and nay. And one skews a little bit to less important, but for streaming and digital sales to income. These are some of the other revenue streams that are important to folks. Almost everybody who took the survey said work for hire or commissions and teaching music. They definitely came out on top. What was kind of on the lower end of things was grants, and then nobody checked sponsorships and brand partnerships. So that's definitely an area that we can explore. And then these are some of the tactics that people are using in terms of marketing your art. Social media overwhelmingly on top. And then things like print advertising, blogging, podcasting, the kind of more niche tactics tend to fall way to the bottom. And in terms of marketing and publicity, folks that things that folks are interested in, we know sponsorship endorsement programs. Ironically, when I asked, who would like to learn about this, this was actually one of the topics that weren't marked as a priority for most artists, but it came out overwhelmingly on top as far as skills you want to learn. So that could be something we can cover as well. And then how much time are you spending on your career every week in terms of your music career? It's pretty scattered across the board here. So we got everything from folks who are only dedicating about 5 hours or less to people who treat like hustling full time, like over 31 hours or more. So that's kind of to give you a pretty good picture of where we are. And thank you so much for everybody for posting those links. I'm making a personal commitment tonight for everyone that shares your link to purchase. I'm buying your albums tonight. So every single artist here is going to get some love and support. That is something I'm just extremely passionate about when it comes to this community. And I hope and really encourage you to follow each other, to like support one another, show each other some love. So being that pitching came out as kind of that #1 requested discussion topic, we're going to focus on that tonight. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of how to pitch your music, and then we're going to allow you to have some breakout sessions where in smaller groups, you can have a chance to practice pitching your music and describing it and finding better ways for it to resonate with the particular audience. Pitching is something that I've been doing and teaching on pitching for quite a number of years. In fact, I did a TED Talk on pitching your way to the TED stage. I've been very blessed and honored throughout the years with my work with our band, the Slants, in securing a number of corporate endorsements and landing a lot of incredible gigs that we probably were not suited for, but we've somehow made our way in. And I credit that very much to pitching. But I'd like to kind of begin by saying that, when it comes to the work of pitching, you should realize that pitching is not about yourself. It's not about ourselves. It's not about the work we're doing, which is kind of ironic because we tend to think, well, what's your elevator pitch? Like, what is it that you have to offer to the world? When it comes to a pitch, it's about your target audience. It's in the same way that like having a resume isn't about the job, the purpose of a resume isn't to get a job, it's to get a job interview, it's to get an exchange. And so the most effective pitches will always come down to pitches that invite collaboration. And just like I often like to say this in terms of the music business, that passion is not enough. Talent is not enough. I wish it were. I wish it was truly about art. But in order to have a sustainable income, they're also kind of relying a little bit on some business savvy as well. And so whether it's pitching or any other aspect of like what we call the music business, I would really encourage you to put as much creativity into that business side of things and how you approach things as you would your own art. That's how you can ultimately stand out from other artists and to make your work distinct. And that's ultimately how you can experience a bit of success as well. So I'll give you a couple of examples of pitches, and then we'll talk about pitching types. One of the most probably common stories that I share when I'm presenting at music business festivals about this topic is when our band started our relationship with Fender guitars. Now, I almost every musician on the planet has heard of Fender, right? It's the biggest music instrument company in the world. And what's really kind of astounding, something that I'm still like pinching myself all the time, like thinking about this, but like we got Fender. We were the first Asian American artist to ever be featured by Fender. And we got a deal with them before our first tour, before our album had any kind of radio play at all. And we got it because of pitching. And so how it worked is I sent them a note. I just went onto their website. I found like a generic contact form, and I asked them a question. I said, hey, how many Asian disco punk bands could you name? And so that was kind of how I opened it up. I said, we're the Slants. We're an Asian American dance rock band. And then I also followed up with a second question. I said, you're selling Hello Kitty guitars. What are you doing to market to anime conventions? Because we play anime conventions. Like I started booking them and playing them, and that's kind of how it happened. Nothing really happens for probably a month, maybe 2 months. And then all of a sudden, while we're at an anime convention in Los Angeles, I get a call and I pick up the phone. Turns out it is the VP of global marketing for Fender Music. And he's just like, hey, Simon, I'm the vice president of Fender Music. I don't know if you realize this, but we get about 500 pitches a week. I never call them. I don't talk to them. I have other people for that. He's like, do you know why I'm calling you? And I'm like, I have no idea. And he said, it's because you asked me two questions that I couldn't answer. One, no, I didn't know any Asian disco punk bands. I didn't know any Asian bands at all. And two, I'm more interested in this. How are you going to sell me Hello Kitty guitars? How are you going to sell that for me? And I immediately kind of shared our story. I was like, hey, I just started this band a few months ago. We just finished recording our first album. But what I can tell you is this. We started playing anime conventions. I'm at one right now. It's our second one ever. But they're filled with thousands of geeky white kids who are obsessed with Hello Kitty. And you're doing nothing to show up at these spaces. But we're like rock stars at these things. I can pull up to one and we can sell hundreds of records in a single weekend. And I would love to kind of bring this kind of enthusiasm and energy to Fender. And, we started talking about some ideas, and then he kind of went into his standard spiel, which was, okay, how an artist endorsement program works is this. You get 50% off of your products, sometimes 40, sometimes 60%, but right around 50. That's your typical artist endorsement program. Everybody gets this. He's like, even Eric Clapton gets this. If he wants 20 guitars for a charity event, he has to buy them from us at half off of retail. And I was like, well, that's great, but Eric Clapton's not going to sell any Hello Kitty guitars for you, but I can. I want a different deal. I don't want the Eric Clapton deal. And he's just like, who is this guy? And so he says, okay, well, what do you have in mind? And I was like, I want you to give me 2 guitars. One is going to be a gift for my publicist's daughter. And the second is because I want to hold a contest. I want to do this online contest where people can sign up. I'm like, what is it that you're looking for? And he says, well, ultimately we want contact info, as much information as possible, including age, mailing address, emails, all that stuff. We run these contests all the time, but we usually get a couple dozen people, maybe 100 people to participate. And I was like, okay, let's do this. You give me the guitar. I will feature it at our next big anime convention, which is out in Seattle, Washington. We're playing for 18,000 people. If I can't get you more entries in the history of the company than you've ever done with any contest, then I'll pay full price for those guitars. But if we get a record breaking a number of entries, then you're going to give those to me for free. And we're going to continue talking about my non-Eric Clapton deal. And he says, okay, let's go with that. We do the contest and we get 13,000 people entered in. It was more than 10x the highest number of entries that they have ever received. And so, of course, we got them. We became a featured artist. And then the next year, they allowed me to design my own bass guitar. it was just this incredible relationship. But it began with this question of like, how can we provide value to this company? What is it they're interested in? Not what am I interested in, but what can I do to pair up our vision with them? So that value is really about, again, that intended audience. The same thing of like how I even got to the TED stage to begin with. So those of you who are not familiar with my career, I've actually been on the TED stage 13 times. Some believe I have the world record for the most number of TED appearances, but it all began with one. And the process in which I got it wasn't that sexy. It's not that interesting. There was no like hack for this thing. All I did is I went to TED.com. I clicked on events. Then I emailed every single event in the world where I could speak their language. And that, the first year that was 300 emails. 299 of them ignored me or said no. But one who was wild enough to say yes. That was TEDx U of W in Seattle, Washington. And so what I did was I wrote 299 follow-up messages to all these other events that, hey, these guys in Seattle, they believe in me. I think I have something important to say. I saw the theme that you have for your event. Here's an idea I have for your event. 2 more of them said yes. So I got 3 talks my first year for the next year. I got multiple of them booked where we performed as a band as well, and on. And I eventually became a TED mentor. I help coach speakers. I consult for TED events. And that all happened because of consistent efforts in demonstrating value to those audiences. There's no real like super deep secret here. But what I can tell you are a couple of tactics, some kind of best practices that might help you out. And I believe it's applicable not only for trying to kind of book yourself into a venue, to get a sponsorship deal, or anything like that, but it's also, these are ways of thinking about how to present yourself as an artist that transcend social media and other mediums as well. These are ways that you can kind of take those best practices and think about your press kit, your YouTube channel description. I mean, it works across the board. So I would really encourage you to kind of throw out the old school elevator pitch model. This idea that they used to call it the 15-second pitch. And believe me, I was a huge advocate of it as well. I was like, okay, what can you communicate in 15 seconds or less? But let's toss them out and talk about newer style ones that are actually based in scientific research. So the first type of pitch is what's known as the question pitch. With the question pitch, that was kind of intuitively done with Fender, and I do it all the time now. But when you have the facts on your side to demonstrate something that is kind of unique and inherent to yourself, asking a question is a much more effective method of reaching out to someone than a statement, because it is inherently provocative. It is inherently engaging. Psychologically, it prompts a response. It gets people to think about the current situation. This is extremely popular, especially in politics as well. There was a very, very famous debate in 1980, which might be before many of you were born, but in that particular election, Ronald Reagan was running, and this was during a deep depression. They had super inflation. They have all these kind of rampant problems. Now, during this debate, Reagan could have went into all these things about like, we're going through depression right now. The strength of the US dollar is deflating. We have problems with jobs and all. He could have done all that stuff, things that you hear at a typical presidential debate. But all he did was ask one simple question. He looked at the camera and he said, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" And that's all it took, because people started thinking about it. Like, no, I lost my job. The economy sucks. Like, things are terrible. And of course, he won in a landslide and kicked off double terms for him. So again, it was just a great way for someone to examine themselves. It's just like, I didn't even realize this, but when I asked Fender Guitars, I was like, what are you doing to sell your guitar, like your Hello Kitty guitar in an anime convention? Or, how many Asian American like acts of this genre can you name that he realized he couldn't answer that, and it kind of engaged him. He started thinking about it in a different kind of way. Now, it is very important to do this if the facts on your side, but if they're not on your side, then the question can be very problematic. So in a more recent presidential debate, Mitt Romney, when he was debating President Obama for Obama's second term, heard about the story with Reagan, and he decides to co-opt it. So he asked in 2012, he said, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" And then what happened is most people watching this thought, okay, what happened? 2008. Oh, the world was falling apart. We were in the deepest economic recession since the Great Depression. Nobody had work. Everyone is like suffering. And then they really realized, well, but today we're experiencing the greatest economic boom of all time. Yes, we are doing better, like because of this. And guess what? Obama won in a landslide. So make sure the question frames things with facts that are actually on your side. And a great way to kind of like figure out what that right question is to figure out like what your declarative pitch, like what is it that you want to announce to the world or to that intended audience, and just think about how can you frame it in a question. All right. Now the second type of pitch that is kind of a newer style, but has been around for ages and ages, is one that I personally struggle with a bit, but is one that is actually incredibly effective, and that is the rhyming pitch. So there was a study in a college in Pennsylvania that issued out old proverbs to people, 60 proverbs to 2 different groups. In one set of the audience, the proverbs were presented as a rhyme. So phrases that you might have heard before, like caution and measure will bring you treasure, or woes unite foes. Now, the second group were presented the exact same proverbs, but in a way that didn't rhyme. So woes unite enemies, or caution and measure will bring you riches. When they surveyed participants on the truthiness of these proverbs, like which of these sayings are true, the overwhelming majority said the ones that rhymed were absolutely true, whereas the ones that didn't rhyme, they didn't feel they were actually as true of statements. Now, when the researchers went back to the participants and they said, hey, did you believe it was more true because it rhymed? Everyone's like, no, of course not. We would never do that. Why would a rhyme influence us, right? It's counterintuitive, but it actually did influence them. And there's been a number of other studies that show this as well. And that's because it's a psychological response. Much like the question prompts a response, it's emotive, it engages you. What rhymes do is it actually taps at a part of your brain. It's called a processing fluency. It helps your brain understand understated truths more quickly. And we know this as musicians because that's the power of music. That's the power of rhythm. Think about it. If you're watching a horror movie, you don't need to know that the killer is coming. They don't have to say it in the movie, right? You know, because the music's coming. That there's something about that. And things that are inherently rhythmic are much more memorable. They stick around. So from back in the day when you had slogans like, see the USA in a Chevrolet, people still remember it today. Even people who were not alive back then have heard of this phrase. That's how much it sticks. Or, when I was growing up, one of the most infamous trials that everyone was watching on TV was the Oj Simpson Trial. Nobody could remember this. I mean, it's like days and days of arguments, but the only moment they really kind of stick in their mind was one line when his attorney, Johnny Cochran, said, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. When OJ was trying to try on those gloves. Just a simple rhyme, but 25 years later, people still remember that one line. Cochran was as an influencer. He knew how to tap into those things. So rhymes can oftentimes help the message go down more easily. Now, the third one that I would love to share is what's oftentimes known as the one-word pitch. The one word pitch is when you decide to embody your work and you distill it down into one single word. It's extremely powerful because like as artists, we tend to be like all over the place. But if you could describe yourself with just a single word that kind of captures the spirit of who you are or the value that you have to offer to other people, what is it? I mean, the people that have really mastered this, like they got it locked down. Think about it. When I say the word search, what company do you think of? Google, right? And when you think of the word Google, you think search, which is interesting because Google doesn't just do search anymore. They do maps. They make Android phones. They do video chat. They had a horrible social media site that flopped. Like they do all these kinds of innovative things, but we know them for search. Like that's that one word association. President Obama, when he was running, had many campaign slogans, but the one that always stuck around is that iconic poster with one word on it. Hope, right? First 4 years. Second 4 years, the one word, forward. So the one word pitch is a great way, especially if you feel like you do a lot of different things. Like, for example, I end up all over the place. I mean, I write books, I speak, I do music, I run nonprofits, etc. But I use the moniker troublemaker, right? I like to disrupt things. I like to make some noise and make some trouble. So that's kind of the thing that I've been using. And it's worked out really well because I believe it captures the spirit of all those things and it puts a playful twist on it. I mean, so much so where I just learned a couple weeks ago that there's a high school in Oregon that is thinking about renaming their high school after me. And they want to change their mascot to the Troublemakers. I mean, weird, mind-blowing, but like they just loved the moniker and they kind of associated it with me. So one word pitches can be extremely powerful. And I'll kind of conclude the pitch section of terms of types of pitches with a longer pitch for those who are interested in revamping your websites, your press kits, emails about yourself, or if you know, for your channel descriptions. This is, I believe it's extremely important if you're doing like an overview video about yourself, particularly on YouTube, and you might even think of it as a social media bio kind of tool as well. And that pitch, it's what's known as the Pixar pitch. So Daniel Pink writes about this in his book on sales and persuasion, and he calls it the Pixar pitch because it's something that is floated around the Pixar company. All of the story editors have kind of weighed in on this. And it's got a couple of different parts to it. But basically what we've learned is that every single Pixar film ever produced and ever will be produced has to fit in one specific framework. All their storylines are basically one story. So that story is broken down into once upon a time, then they say blah, 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 every day, blah, 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 one day, blah, 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 because of that, until finally. So it's basically a story framework that, you know, for those of you who study story frameworks, it's actually very similar to what's known as the hero's journey, but a kind of more simplified version of it. So if you think about, I say like a film like Finding Nemo, right? Once upon a time, there was a fish named Marlin who had a son named Nemo. Every day, he would caution Nemo against the dangers of swimming in the open ocean. But one day, Nemo decides to defy those orders and swim in the ocean. Because of that, he was caught by a diver and ended up in the aquarium of a dentist's office in Sydney. And because of that, Marlin went on to a search to find Nemo, recruiting all kinds of sea creatures as friends along the way, until one day they finally reunite and realize that their commitment to one another can overcome anything. So very quick, simple Pixar pitch, but basically you kind of like frame things up into like, here's the problem, this is the status quo, like this is what's happening every single day. But because of something like, say you taking deliberate action to change, to disrupt the status quo with the work that you're doing. You talk about like what that's doing because of that, what changes until finally something. You can even leave it open-ended, right? Like if you're pitching a company, you're doing these kinds of things until finally your company joined up with me and we reached new levels, we hit a new market, or we increased voter registration, or whatever that end goal is. So it's a quick, simple framework. I'm going to, I'll copy and paste kind of the general framework, the phrases into the chat box, so you have it if you're taking notes. We'll also make the chat as a downloadable file later on as well. And so those are kind of 4 major types of pitches. And the reality is that, like, we're creatives. And so I want to encourage you to be as creative as possible. Like, feel free to do things. You can combine them, you can mix and match, and you see them as tools in your toolbox that you can deploy whenever the situation is most appropriate for it. Because some pitches are going to be more effective than others, depending on the situation. Some ways of describing yourself, and it all depends on who you're trying to reach. And so now I want to kind of break us up into some breakout rooms. I'm going to pause the recording real quick. All right, welcome back, everybody. How was that?
It was cool. Nice and intimate.
Would anyone like to share their pitch? It's okay if it's a work in progress.
I'm down.
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Have you ever met a Vietnamese American artist who talks openly about their mental health issues? My name is Tony Nguyen. I go by Win Meets West. And more than just my music, I've talked with a bunch of people on podcasts and day-to-day conversations about, like, how do you find a career? How do you find a life that you deserve to live, rather than someone like having that be expected of you? I think a lot of your Asian American colleagues can really attest to that fact of, like, it feels like there's a weight of expectation on them. So I'd love to give a talk at your company or your organization about how do you unpack those expectations, and how do you move forward into a career, into a place that your employees want to go, that they really want to be in, so they can live more fulfilled lives.
Wow, very, very powerful. Awesome. So my little minor suggestion that I would add to at that very end, as you kind of close with that question or statement, is maybe articulating like where the music part comes in, or where the artistry comes in, like how you can use that to bring out some of those issues. And it could be anything from like it makes it more effective because this is a part that taps a part of the brain that unlocks these kinds of things to it makes it fun, makes it memorable, and it can be incorporated into any kind of corporate wellness program. So, but fantastic, very nice. Anyone else want to share?
Hi, I don't mean to take up any more space. But I guess I would just like to try it out. I also went to a private room because I might do inappropriate things. But okay, cool. So I'll start. So, what type of Asian do you think I am? Am I the type A, always getting A's in every extracurricular Asian who sings classical music? Or am I the depressed Asian F that sings sad boy musics about suicide? Or am I the angry Asian American that demands reparations and sings angry white man hatred songs? Or am I the slutty Oriental fantasy that writes hoe songs? Oh, well, I can be all of those Asians in one. And, with your company, I would love to explore the many different facets of what it means to be an Asian American and what it means to be a musician. So I hope you'll give me the chance to show you all those different sides of what I think being Asian American means to me.
Very cool. I very love the performance of it as well. I mean, I could see it being easily being a YouTube welcome video or a social video as people are visiting your website or your channels. Yeah, I again, kind of like when Tony was kind of like ending with that pitch for the company, I would again kind of do a little minor edit of just a stronger type, like what does it mean, like what is the benefit of like showing those different sides, and maybe even explaining how like, hey, you know, I know in your employees, like we all wear a different mask or we all wear different versions of ourselves. And here's how you can, by learning about this, how employees could be more fulfilled through this because they get that fullest expression of who they are and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But fantastic. So like the reason why that I wanted to kind of put everyone into breakout rooms is because like the more you say it, the more you verbalize it, the better you'll get at it, the more you hone it. Just like in the same kind of way, if you are pitching via email, which these days, let's be honest, is like 99 out of 100 times, the more that you send the email and carefully look at what works and what doesn't work so well, the more you'll kind of hone it down and refine it, find that voice that is unique to you and that voice which is resonating with your intended audience as well. So I would encourage you like to continue to hone it, to refine it and to practice and just keep thinking like, well, what if I was in this situation? Or what if I was speaking to this type of person? Now, I just wanted to say a couple of final things about the action of pitching itself. And then we're gonna allow some time for folks to ask away any kind of question that you might have. Now, I don't claim to know like everything about everything when it comes to the music business world, but we'll do our best to help each other out and find some answers for those questions that you might have. So I mentioned briefly that the majority of your pitches are going to go through email. And so one of the things that will immediately set it apart is going to be that email subject line, right? You decide whether to open or not. But the same kind of principle will also apply to your social media posts as well. And that's basically this. Most people are driven by one of two needs: utility or curiosity. So as you like, this is especially true in the business world and especially true in the entertainment world, right? And this is how it works. The busier it is for someone, so those Monday mornings, early on, or when there's just a flood of activity happening, the more people will gravitate towards a utility-based subject line. The lower the inbox level, the more that they are exploring things that kind of tickle that curiosity part of themselves. And the worst thing you can do is to not choose a side, is by being right smack in the middle. Like, so basically choose, is this going to be utilitarian, like very useful, or is this something to kind of spark their curiosity? Like, for example, a curiosity thing would be that example of the Fender pitch. Like, hey, how many Asian American dance rock bands do you know? Or a utilitarian thing would be like, here's 3 ways that I can sell you your Hello Kitty guitar at anime conventions, right? Like, it's very clear and defined and to the point. The other part of this is that, like, same thing with, like, when you think about social media, it should also fall within certain categories of things as well. Facebook actually did the world a huge favor when they unlocked different types of reactions. And so when I do workshops on social media marketing for folks, one of the things I say is, like, you should make your audiences feel something. Like, if you're not sure of what they ought to feel, choose one of those strong reactions on Facebook. Because the reality is, no one wants to just like something. Liking something is bland. You want to love it. You want something that stirs you up, that makes you angry. You want something that makes you laugh, like, deeply. Like, these are the kinds of emotions that people want. If it's a mix of anything, it makes for a very confusing scenario and people aren't sure quite how to respond. Like, if you're just like, wow, here's an announcement of my new album, and there's no excitement to it, there's nothing that sparks one of those emotions, people are going to react in that very same way. They might like it out of solidarity, like, well, they're going to judge me if they don't see me liking this post, but they're not going to blast it out across their network, not unless they feel something. So much in the same way that email subject lines have to be either utilitarian or, driving of curiosity, social is kind of in the same kind of boat. Like, choose a very definitive path and then stick with it. The second thing that you need to make sure of when pitching is you should always have a call to action. I believe the call to action should actually be in the beginning and not the end. So I'm not as active now, but when I had this company called Last Stop Booking, when I would represent artists and booking tours for them, and when I was doing my daily podcast show, I would probably get pitched to, I would say, saw maybe 300 to 400 pitches every week from artists all around the world. So it gave me a chance to see really quick, like what worked well and what didn't work well. I will tell you the thing that I dreaded the most. And whenever I speak with my friends who are artist managers and label owners, they share the same feeling. The number one thing we cannot stand is when people just dive into a really long story about who they are, like this huge biography, and there's no discernible call to action. The reality is most of us in this industry hold a lot of different roles. We do a lot of stuff. And so if you just kind of word vomit a biography at someone, they're just kind of like, what do I do with this? Are they looking for a deal? Are they looking for management? Are they wanting to book a show? I don't know. Like I always say, begin with that call to action. Maybe frame it up in a way that we talked about, like in terms of a pitch, like a question or something like that. But like begin with that, so it's very clear what it is you're expecting. Then the following paragraph should be those supporting reasons why someone ought to consider that action. And then you end with that call to action once more. But I always say this, always end with a question. And it can't be a yes or no question. It's got to be like an open-ended question. Because again, psychologically, it prompts a response. If you just say, if it's a yes or no question, they could just say no. But so for example, when I pitch companies about a collaboration or a brand sponsorship or something like that, I never say like, are you interested in hearing more? I say, what can I send you to follow up next? Or like, when would be best to follow up? That sort of thing. And so I don't even like, it's kind of a presumptuous question in a way. Like I'm assuming that the answer is yes. So what do you need next to make this happen? And for some reason, it just works again and again. I mean, I think over the years, I've probably gotten over 30 corporate sponsorships for our band, all across the board from, and some of the things we don't even use. Joe is one of my bandmates. He's seen this across the board. Like we got, what's something we got recently? Like a shaving company or something. And we ended up like not liking it.
Oh, I hated it. I cut myself so many times using the razors.
But you gotten other things out of it, from food to nutrition things to music gear. I mean, like it just happens, and like, you know, it's okay to try things out too that don't necessarily work. But again, just frame it up in a question. Make sure like that question is again in service of the intended audience. And then if you don't hear back, it's all right to follow up. I wouldn't follow up like every single day. I would say like wait a week or two. And then like, again, when you follow up, make it an even shorter email, but always use that pitch again. Maybe it's a question, maybe it's a very specific thing. For example, if the news changes, like the circumstances change, either with you or the company or the intended audience that you're trying to reach. You know, I've done this when booking major festivals before, where sometimes I don't get any response for months. I'm just like, you know, I'm trying to book a tour. Like, how do I do this? And then we'll get a new interview or a magazine profile, and I'll send a link. I'll say, hey, just in case you missed it, we just got profiled by this magazine, and we're getting a lot of momentum in your area. Would love to bring that. Like, what do we need to do? Or, hey, I noticed that, you know, a couple of acts dropped out, and you have space now, you know, what can we do to help fill this up? Like, what is it you're looking for? And so you make them like quick and easy questions, but just questions that provoke that response. Because the more you correspond, the more likely it'll lead to that desired result. And the other thing is, like, by forcing them to reply to you, you're more likely to end up in their inbox instead of the promotion or spam folder. So there's like technical and logistical kind of things to this as well. But that's just kind of a very, my brief overview on pitching and some of those best practices. Again, there are some other resources available. I would be more than happy to share with you if you're interested. You can send me an email. I could send you the TED Talk I've done. For those of you who filled out the survey who are interested in some of the books I've written, I'm going to send those to you, and some of them, all of them include some variation of these ideas as well. So you'll be able to kind of continue learning about them and figure out ways to refine them in a way that makes sense for you. So now I would love to open it up. One of the things that we want to make sure that we do at the Slants Foundation is that we continue to serve your particular needs. So if you have a particular question about the music business, about your music career, we're here to help answer those particular questions. So feel free to vocalize it, or you can throw it in the chat box. I'll try and do my best to monitor that. And we're here to provide some space for that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
First, thank you so much for the time. This was really helpful, and it's really awesome to see an Asian American artist who's done so well and be a really good example. So my question was, something that I've always struggled a bit with is the idea of like being discouraged from pursuing the arts out of fear of being a starving artist, and like seeing you talk about it from a business perspective and like making this a business and generate income. How did you get your start? Like, did you starve as an artist in the beginning? I'm just curious, like, how do you get from like zero to startup to like becoming a business?
Well, I'll say this, there have definitely been moments of starvation. There have been moments of plenty as well. I think every artist goes through this. I've had a little bit of a less conventional path than most folks, I think. For example, I started my first record label when I was 13, and I did so because I just had this really kind of, I think, hustle mentality put into me from my folks. They were immigrants who started their own businesses, and I kind of grew up in the back of a Chinese restaurant, and I saw what they were doing, and I just kind of thought of like little things. For example, when I was helping out and I was bussing tables, I noticed ways I could increase my own tips at 7 years old. So for example, I would gamble with the customers. I mean, I probably shouldn't have been doing this, but like I would gamble them in games of tic-tac-toe because I figured out how I could always win or tie in that game. As long as I went first, I could always do this. So, and who's going to say no to some kid, right? I just bet him like 50 cents or whatever, and kind of hustled my way into getting enough quarters to walk down the street and play me some Street Fighter 2, which just came out. And then I would hustle all those kids and like playing Street Fighter 2. So I think some kind of that mentality stuck with me when I was in my early teenage years, and I noticed that like, wow, there's a lot of bands out there who just have no idea how to market themselves, no idea how to get printed merchandise. And so what I did is I hopped on my bike and I rode around to printing shops around town and negotiated better rates. And then I put out a catalog and say, hey, if you want to get t-shirts made, stickers made, whatever, you can order through me. And I would just basically act as that middle person. I figured out, okay, just by working with my local community, I can do this. And that's how I kind of started that label. So it was very much like learning as I went. Of course, I was able to refine that process as I got older, but I will say this, I learned a lot from doing two things. One was just touring in a punk rock band. I dropped out of college when I was on a full ride scholarship to do this, and learned, like, I had to learn, because like if we didn't make enough money that night, the gas tank wasn't going to get filled. So figure out how to produce merchandise that would sell, how I could book events in a way that I could get higher guarantees for the band, and how I can use up the spaces on tour in a way that served the band. So for example, most bands, when they're on tour, they're driving and they're playing. And when they're not playing the show, they're out shopping for records, they're hanging out, maybe they're seeing their friends in town. I was like, no, we're going to do in-stores. We're going to do radio interviews. I'm going to figure out a way to maximize that time, and figure out how I can maximize downtime too. So to kind of that, what helped me and a lot of the band members who've been in the Slants over the years, when were afraid of starving is that during our long drives, we would create Wi-Fi hotspots in our tour bus, and folks would do side hustles like edit websites, do consulting gigs and other things to kind of supplement the income we made from shows. So that was another way to kind of do that. But it was very much like just trying things out, figuring, like documenting what worked well, what didn't work out so well, and then just continue to do that. For many years up until recently, I didn't have a Netflix account. I was like, I don't need it. I'm going to spend that time reading books. And, I decided I'm going to focus on marketing, business communications, and things like that. I would highly encourage you to like think about what those fears are. If it's a fear of security, then like, okay, then you can shore that up on the business end by thinking like treating your career as a business. And treating it like a business means studying business. It means thinking about it if it were a framework of a different industry and applying those principles to your own. It means investing in your career. And, like no one starts a business just to start it. They have to invest it very intentionally by choosing where to market, choosing how to understand their audience, and most importantly, creating a product that resonates with those folks. So like honing your craft.
Can I weigh in too, Simon?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that in terms of like the money question, something I talk to a lot of young artists about is there's a difference between making your art and making money off of your art too. And I think that a lot of times people think that like if something's my passion, then I have to make my living off of it. And the truth is like I'm an artist. I've made a bunch of work, and most of the time I did not make that much money off of it. I maybe didn't go in the hole. I didn't go in the red for it. I was able to cut even on my costs. But there's a lot of artists, there's a lot of people you probably respect out there who did maybe for the first 10 years of their career, they never broke even, right? And I don't think we should equate like being a real artist with making your income off of it. I think that everyone has to do what they got to do to pay the bills, to eat. I think that if you do want to try and figure out a way to make money off of your art or to make that your mainstream of income, yeah, there's so many ways to do that. There's like so much information, there's so much like business and stuff like Simon was saying. But I also think that like if you think of yourself as a business too, you don't want to cut off a stream of income just because you're like, I'm really passionate about this thing. It's important to make the work sustainable so that you can continue. Sometimes like a lot of people I know, they do other jobs, like they teach music, and because that makes a lot more money, and then they use the money they make from that to fund independently financing their own albums and their own project and their music. I also got a question I want to answer here about being a professional songwriter, also from Kathy, but I figured there might be some other people here who are also interested in the question of like, how do I become a professional songwriter? I mentioned in our breakout group that I majored in music business in my undergrad. I lived in Nashville for a long time and I worked in the music industry there. So that's kind of how the question came up. But there's a couple different routes to kind of like getting what we call getting a publishing deal, right? And becoming a professional songwriter. So at least in the industry, there generally are two different kinds of songwriters. There's writers, and then there's artist writers, right? So people who have bands, who are performers, who write their own songs, and then because they're putting their stuff out, a publishing company contacts them because guess what? The publishing company thinks I can make money off of this songwriter, so I want to work with them. The other kind is, as we were mentioning earlier, the professional songwriter who isn't a performing artist, isn't like touring, isn't performing. They write songs for other artists who then record them. And so the route to kind of becoming a professional songwriter, it's much more industry. It's kind of like behind the curtain, right? I can mostly only speak from like Nashville because that was where I was in the context, but we're considered one of the like biggest cities for professional songwriters because we actually have a quite large like professional songwriter like class that lives there, like in terms of like a working class. And there is like a specific route. Now, the way that works in Nashville specifically is country and Christian music are big industries there, and they have lots of performing artists who don't necessarily write their own songs. In order to be a professional songwriter, there has to be a route to your songs becoming performed by an artist. So if that's an existing industry where there's systems where people pitch songs to artists, then there's a way for those songs to become recorded. Let's say you write with a lot of performing artists, then your songs eventually find their ways into albums and recordings, and then they start to get played. But one way or the other, you have to think about it this way, like who is going to be performing the music, what kind of music am I writing, and what is that audience? So if you're not country or Christian, the likelihood of becoming a professional songwriter in Nashville is super low, because that's the way that the industry is designed. In LA and New York, it's a little different. I know in terms of the record industry in Asia, because of like big pop music here, there's lots of people who are producer writers who pitch to pop artists, because that's the other thing that people do a lot. But I think that in terms of pop writing, it's really changed, because a lot of like the big pop songs that are professional songwriters, they kind of have their own production houses, and they kind of specifically pop artists will specifically go work with them. Like Max Martin is probably one of the most famous kind of like professional songwriters. He's so well known now that pop artists specifically go to him and they want to try and get and work with him. But if you're nobody, if nobody knows who you are yet, you have to start developing relationships with existing artists. You have to write with them and learn how to write with other people. The other thing that you can do, which I don't necessarily recommend, because you can start demoing and writing your own songs and then pitching them to artists that you think might be good for them. But the success rate of that, I think, would be really low if you don't already have an existing relationship with those artists. But like we said, like, you can work on that pitch if that's a pitch you want to try and do. And we can work with you to try and help you figure that out for yourself. But I think that my advice to any young songwriter, whether you want to be an artist or you want to mostly like work behind the scenes and produce, or like just songwrite, is to write, to continue to write, to develop relationships with other musicians, because I think that's actually what's going to help you best form your craft. But then also to an industry person, like on the business end, if no one wants to record your songs, if there's no audience for your songs, then there's no financial incentive for them to sign you and then to continue to pitch you. And they need to believe in you as a songwriter. They're not going to be as much concerned with like your story and the image and the marketing of that, but rather like, who are the artists who you could see yourself writing for? Who are the artists that will be recording your songs and therefore making some sort of money and income? I think that aside from really established industries like pop and Christian and country, it's really hard to make a living just as a songwriter, because the royalty payment that you get just as a songwriter is very low. And if you're co-writing with people, it's even lower, because you have to split. So like, back in the day when people bought songs off of iTunes for 99 cents, or you bought a CD and there's like a song on album, a songwriter gets paid 9.1 cents per copy. So that's it, 9.1 cents out of, the 99 cents that gets sold, 9.1 cents goes to the songwriter. And if you're in a band and you co-wrote the song, there's 4 of you, you split that 9.1 cents between the 4 of you, right? So anyway, that's just my quick little thing. Are there any other questions that people have that they wanted to ask?
Can I tag on to your lesson? A lot of people think that they want to aim for artists, to write for artists who are like kind of higher in stature, more successful than them. However, my recommendation is start where you are, or even like work with people who are even more green than you, because you'll see the same people going up as you see people like kind of petering out in their career. So the little ratty kid down the street who's like really passionate, like if you work with that really, really ratty kid, he might blow the fuck up next year. And so don't always like shoot upwards, like shoot even or shoot down as well. And I think that'll get you a lot more that'll let you plant a lot more seeds that will potentially germinate.
No, I think that's a fantastic advice. And actually, Bao, I'm hoping you can share a little bit about this as well. So another avenue that folks can generate income with songwriting is also through licensing and writing for like commercial application. Bao, you've been pretty successful in this area. You've got a number of songs landed. Can you talk a little bit or just speak to that?
Yeah. It's actually the same principle. I got started because I just let my friends making skate videos in the mid 2000s use my music in their skate videos. And then pretty soon, medium level skate and snowboard videos picked up my songs for like a couple $100. And then pretty soon, like, Oakley and like Burton and stuff were picking up my songs for several $1,000. And then, plus royalties and stuff. And so it's really like the eyeballs are what counts at a certain point in your career. And licensing is, they'll either pay you a flat rate for a mechanical license, which means they'll reproduce your song on a video or a commercial, or let's say Vogue has their end of the year magazine recap of like the coolest moments of 2020. And they use like whatever seconds of your piece. So they'll pay you a mechanical license that's up front or per view. So for example, if I had a song in a sports montage for ESPN, like I'm still seeing money from that like several years later because they're doing reruns. So those are the relationships that you can think about, as well as like writing for other artists. You can begin to let other people use your songs in a mechanical reproduction way. And, then you can start saying, hey, look, snowboard kids really love my songs because they have like a really steady beat that kind of matches the BPM where people snowboard at. And then that becomes your pitch when you go over to, some bigger production house that's doing like a whole gigantic movie that's going to be in the theaters or whatever.
And you can also leverage that to get a sponsorship relationship with snowboarding companies, or play inside snowboarding events at film festivals that have a lot of snow, or like Park City, Utah. I mean, there are ways to like take that momentum that you get in an area and you carry that over into other areas in your career as well. So opportunities are all over the place. It just requires a lot of attention. As both Bao and Sue-Ann mentioned, it requires a lot of relationships. For better or worse, this is a very, very relationship-driven industry. And that's
I was going to say, Simon, if people are interested in learning more about that realm of music, it's called sync licensing, SYNC, for synchronization. And, the main people you're working with are music supervisors who all they do is look for music to place in certain pieces of things. So, sync licensing is, there's a whole convention for that you can go to every year.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think also should be considered, you kind of, I think your example illustrates this well, is that if you focus in a very specific niche, it's more easy to generate momentum if you're working with a very specific defined audience, i.e. snowboarding videos or like amateur skateboard videos or that kind of thing, and work your way up, than to try and target some massive audience and work your way down, because it's far more competitive at those levels. I was able to generate a lot of momentum in our band's career by focusing in on those kind of niche audiences. I mean, for the example I gave earlier with Fender Music, that was a very specific one. Like, we were playing anime conventions before people knew about that it was even possible to have a concert at an anime convention. And then years later, our band started touring and playing at law conventions, which sounds like super boring until like you realize you just sold a couple hundred t-shirts. And I don't know, these days, maybe it's because I'm getting old, I'm like, I actually prefer those events because they end by like 4 p.m. and they feed you really nice. And I'm not loading out gear at 3 a.m. But like, niche audiences could be another powerful way, because it's easier to be like that big fish in a smaller pond than to be lost in this ocean. You just get drowned out by everything else. It's much easier to build relationships when it's a smaller community. So sometimes that's a way to kind of think about things as well.
Yeah, if you've got filmmaker friends, keep your eye out and just be like, hey, I've got something that could work there.
Yeah, we've got a number of board members who work in film as well. You know, it's really fun, and it's fun to see your art being paired up with another person's art too. So you can think about collaborating with visual artists, with dancers, with all kinds of folks, and it's fun. So we do have time for a couple of other questions if folks have anything else you're kind of wondering, that any kind of ground you want to cover.
Jaren here. I have 2 questions. Is there enough time for 2 questions?
Fire away. We'll do what we can.
Cool. So the first question I have is more on the business standpoint. when you're pitching your music, or you're pitching yourself as an artist, is there such a thing as like a bad opportunity, or like any like route that you shouldn't be going in terms of when you're looking for companies that you want to collaborate with? Yeah, is there such a thing as like to be cognizant about like bad opportunities?
Oh, I think there's the minefield out there of bad opportunities, right? There's things that if it's not a good fit, if it say you collaborate with somebody that is inherently against your set of values or the values and interests of your audience, that can definitely discredit you in a lot of ways and delegitimize your work. So there's a lot of things that I think to consider. Like, do I want, like, if you say if you're partnering with a company, you just think, or an organization, like, do I want this to represent me in some kind of way? Like, how would that reflect? And if you have some hesitation towards it, probably isn't going to be a good idea. Like that gut check is a really important thing. In terms of other opportunities, there's always going to be a lot of distractions out there, and some things are going to move you closer to your goals than others. I think, first of all, every artist, like whenever I do mentorship with artists, I always begin with the first task of like figuring out what your specific goals are. Your goals, I believe, are, I use the acronym SMARTER. Like, people use the SMART acronym, I just add a couple other letters. But basically they should be specific, right? They should be measurable, so they should have a very specific number attached to it. They should be attainable. They should be relevant to your work. It should be time bound, like you're going to accomplish this by whenever. They should involve everyone in your team. I mean, and if you have a significant other, this is especially important too. They got to be on board, and they should be revisited often. Those are kind of the guiding principles. And I pair this up with the analogy that Neil Gaiman, the sci-fi fantasy author extraordinaire, does. And he kind of presented this example, and he says, like, I want you to imagine your goals as like a mountain in the distance. Every road that you take should lead you to that mountain. Sometimes you might veer off and go a little bit of a different way, but make sure you come back to that mountain. And if it's not getting you closer to that mountain, if it's taking you in the opposite direction, then you need to get rid of that. That would be an example of a bad opportunity, right? So his example is like when he was writing novels and none of them were taken off. They weren't flying. He was offered like this journalism job, a very well-paying job, but he thought about it, and as much as he's like, well, it's still writing, he's like, it's taking me away from my mountain. So he ended up doing something else, became an international bestseller. Now he's like a multimillionaire with all kinds of movies and series and everything else. So like, stay focused on that mountain and use that as kind of that guiding principle as well. And you had a second question too.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, my second question is related to just being a musician and a singer-songwriter. I pretty much my experience in music is mainly performing. Like, I've been performing since I was like 5, and it wasn't until like maybe a couple of years ago where I've kind of started trying to find myself as an artist and trying to make original content and writing my own stuff. But the thing is, for me, I feel like I'm technically disadvantaged when it comes to instruments, and I didn't really learn music theory. And so with that in mind, like, having that background in music education and having a background in knowing how to play instruments, is that a complete disadvantage to me? I mean, granted, I can easily learn these things, but it will take time. But as a starting like artist, starting singer songwriter, is this a complete disadvantage to me? And how do I kind of pave the path for me without those resources?
So I'm a firm believer in taking any kind of disadvantage you have and turning it into something that you can build a strength off of. If, for example, you don't feel like your chops are quite there in terms of like music making, production, playing, that sort of thing, then you can choose to do one of two things. One, you learn it yourself. You dig in, you take in those lessons, and you work on that skill set, and you become the best at it that you possibly can. Or B, you outsource it. You partner up with somebody who has those skills, and even if you don't. And so that's kind of like the twofold option, right? But if you outsource it, then you say, okay, what is it that I'm really, really good at? Like if you've been performing since you're 5, maybe you're a great, like charismatic performer on stage. And you're like, hey, maybe I don't want to like be tied to a keyboard or guitar. I want to be like in people's faces, singing and dancing and not tied down to an instrument. That could totally be an advantage as well. Like I do recommend like getting as proficient as possible, knowing as much as you can, both on the creative side as well as the business side, just so when you're working with others, you kind of have a working language between the two of you. That always helps. But like, you don't have to do everything excellently, right? I mean, I've been playing bass guitar since I was 10 years old, so almost 30 years now. And I always like tell people how mediocre of a player I am. Like, I don't know how I've gotten away with it, but it's because I know my strengths are elsewhere, and like I know enough to be able to play and write and do things like that. But I know that sometimes that ain't gonna be it, and I like, because I work in a band setting, I work in a collaborative setting. I'm like, we go by this notion that the best idea wins, and sometimes if it's not your personal performance, if it's not your idea, it's okay because it's for the greater good of the band. That's kind of how we chose to navigate it. For an individual artist, it might be kind of a different approach, but knowing that there are opportunities and those limitations only remain as limitations if you don't do anything about them. If you are very intentional about addressing those and kind of one of those options, then they aren't there yet for you anymore. You can just focus on moving forward in other areas.
If you like playing music, you should just play with other people, even if you feel like you have a disadvantage on the instrument, because that's literally how you learn. So it's not a disadvantage too, because you might be bringing something completely more interesting and new to the table than someone who's trained through years of master's degrees and whatever else. I've been in that setting where I'm the crappiest instrumentalist in the room, but the ideas are different, so people enjoy it and we have fun, and then you play more and you get better at it. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a visual artist, Jaron, and as a background, so I never had music training. But I believe that the weirdest shit comes out of people who don't know what they're doing. So, so that's great. Yeah, I don't think that's something you need to be super worried about. It's about ideas and intention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, for instance, Sia, who is an amazing singer, writer, she doesn't play any instruments either. She doesn't really know any music theory. She always partners with co-writers who do know instruments and can write tracks and things like that. I was gonna say the same thing as Simon did too, is you can find collaborators and you work together, and it doesn't matter necessarily that you don't have the background in certain instruments or theory knowledge, as long as like it works with you and you can communicate with each other. And like what Bao said, like a lot of, and Joe too, so many times it's people who aren't kind of weighed down by all these ideas of what they should do necessarily, that can have really natural sense of rhythm, really natural like ear for melodies, because they're not trying to fit it into necessarily musical ideas. Like my friend Darren, he's the lead singer of this band called The Many, and he also doesn't, play any instruments or read music, but he's one of the most amazing worship leaders I've ever seen, and really knows how to, he's very charismatic. He really knows how to get the crowd and people like involved and emotionally like charged and stuff. And that's oftentimes what a band needs. It doesn't need like another person to kind of, but like a charismatic frontman. Like, yeah, that's often what's needed. And energy, I think like the ability to connect with the audience, the ability to work together as a team, those are like things that really make bands great, right? Not necessarily like technical musical knowledge. And a lot of us who've been in the industry for a long time and like a lot of different kinds of music, we can tell you many, many examples of really great work that wasn't technically complicated.
Absolutely. And my final thing on that is like, for anyone working both the creative side or the business side, surround yourself with people who are better than you. They will force you to be a better player. They'll force you to be more innovative and savvy in terms of your work. Like if you're not the worst person in the room, then you need to find a better room. Like that's how you're going to level up and step up to those situations.